I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. You are being stalked. But, you've done absolutely everything right. You've documented every single threat. You've installed like high definition security cameras all around the perimeter of your property. You've even gone as far as hiring a private investigator out of your own pocket.
Right, which is huge. Not everyone can do that.
Exactly. And you have handed this perfect, comprehensive, chronological dossier straight over to your local police department. You've taken self-defense classes. You are armed. But the system that was built to protect you, the legal and digital framework of our society, it just moves at a glacial pace.
Yeah, it's incredibly slow.
It moves far too slowly to actually save you. And the monster you are running from, the person orchestrating this entire campaign of terror, is far, far closer than you think.
It is, well, it's the ultimate modern nightmare, really. What makes this scenario so deeply unsettling is that it strips away the illusion of safety we've built around ourselves. It forces us to confront the reality that our protective measures, both our digital firewalls and our legal safety nets, often operate on a severe delay.
A delay that costs lives.
Exactly. When violence is imminent, an administrative backlog isn't just an inconvenience. It is a literal death sentence.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are taking a very close look at the chilling, highly calculated 2023 murder of Kristil Krug in Broomfield, Colorado. But we are also looking at the aftermath, which is the groundbreaking legislative reform that her tragic death ignited.
And we really have to look at both pieces to understand the full picture here.
We do, and we are pulling from a massive stack of sources to reconstruct this timeline for you. We've got detailed investigative reporting from 5280 Magazine, coverage from CBS's 48 Hours, and local news affiliates like KGW, KLCC, and 9 and UWS.
Which is a lot of ground to cover.
It is. We're also parsing through court digests, district attorney press releases, and official legislative bulletins from the Oregon State Legislature. So our mission for this deep dive is to chronologically unpack the forensic architecture of what was essentially a manufactured terror campaign.
The breadth of these sources is necessary, though, because we are dealing with overlapping systems here. We have the criminal investigation, the digital forensics, the psychological profiling of an abuser.
Which is terrifying on its own.
Truly terrifying. And then finally, the legislative machinery of state government.
Right. We want to understand how everyday digital tools are weaponized in intimate partner violence. And finally, we want to explore how one family's incredible grief is actually transforming the legal landscape of the United States. To help us synthesize the psychological, forensic, and legal complexities of this case, I have our resident expert here.
Thanks for having me. The details of this case really require a calm, analytical approach. We are going to be walking through some incredibly dark territory today, looking at how coercive control operates behind closed doors.
And how digital privacy laws inadvertently shield abusers, right?
Exactly. And what happens when the literal speed of justice fails to match the speed of a physical threat?
So, to understand the sheer terror of this crime, we first must understand the people involved. The story doesn't start with the murder. It starts with the dynamic between the victim, the husband, and a ghost from the past. Let's look closely at Kristil Krug, because if you have a stereotypical image of a passive, helpless victim in your head, Kristil just shatters it completely.
She really does. The concept of victimology, which is studying the background and traits of the victim to understand the crime, reveals a woman of extraordinarily high agency. Kristil was not someone who shrank from a challenge.
Not at all. She was 43 years old, a mother of 3 young children. But long before that, she was a high school valedictorian. She grew up to be a brilliant biochemical engineer, spending 19 years at Agilent Technologies, managing these incredibly complex projects.
That level of professional focus is intense.
Yeah, and she wasn't just someone who sat behind a desk crunching numbers. She had this fascinating duality to her life. She danced ballet and modern dance at the Ayurveda Center, which requires immense physical discipline. And on the flip side, she grew up fixing muscle cars with her father, Lars Grimsrud.
And that mechanical background is a crucial window into her psychology. Her father was an aerospace engineer,
Yeah.
He didn't just teach her how to change a tire. He taught her how to dismantle and reassemble complex machinery.
Right. There's that amazing story about her driving a massive 1976 Pontiac Bonneville as a teenager.
Yes. She understood how systems worked, how separate parts fit together to create a functioning whole. When you train a mind to engineer solutions and fix broken engines, that person does not default to panic when a problem arises. They default to analysis.
That makes so much sense. If an engine is knocking, you find the source. If someone is threatening you, you build a defense. That was just her wiring.
Exactly. She was analytical down to her core.
Which brings us to her husband of 16 years, Daniel Krug. He was also 43. He was an Eagle Scout. He worked in an administrative capacity at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, or the CDPHE.
Right, a stable government job.
Yeah, if you looked at them standing in their driveway in suburban Broomfield, they looked like the quintessential successful American family.
The suburban camouflage was highly effective. But when you look past the Eagle Scout badge and the government job, the behavioral fractures were always there. Kristil's family saw them.
They did. Her father, Lars, noted an early arrogance in Daniel. He used a very specific phrase to describe him, which I found so striking. He called him a cross between a car salesman and a politician.
That paints a very specific picture, doesn't it? It's someone who is highly concerned with optics, someone who is always pitching a version of reality, always trying to manage how they are perceived by the room.
Yeah, like they're always selling you something.
Exactly. It implies a transactional nature to relationships. But more concerning than the optics, though, was his temper. Kristil's sister recalled how Daniel's face would turn bright red with frustration when he felt he was losing control of a situation or an argument.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the most significant behavioral red flag, the one that forensic psychologists identify as a massive warning sign, was a dynamic of manufactured inseparability very early in their relationship.
Okay, wait. When you say manufactured inseparability, that sounds a lot like the honeymoon phase of any intense new relationship, you know? How does someone differentiate between a partner who is just deeply in love and wants to spend time with you and an abuser who is laying the groundwork for isolation?
That's a great question, and the difference lies in the underlying intent and the restriction of outside agency.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, in a healthy honeymoon phase, you want to be together, sure, but you still maintain your individual friendships, your hobbies, your independent movement. Manufactured inseparability, on the other hand, is engineered.
Engineered how?
The abuser creates a dynamic where the couple must do absolutely everything together. They run errands together, they share all digital passwords immediately, they slowly cut out third-party social engagements unless they attend as a unit.
So it looks like a romance, but it's really a trap.
Exactly. To the outside world, or even to the victim initially, it feels like intense, devoted romance. But the abuser is actually establishing a baseline where they can monitor the victim's movements and interactions at all times without appearing overtly controlling.
That is so insidious. But by late 2023, however, that control was entirely slipping. The marriage was actively fracturing. The inseparability was gone. Kristil was actually sleeping in her son's room.
She was pulling away.
She was actively contemplating a divorce, and crucially, she was seeking full custody of their 3 children. She was documenting his behavior and preparing to leave.
And we have to note, this is the most statistically dangerous time for any victim of intimate partner violence. The moment the abuser senses a total, irrevocable loss of control, the behavior escalates.
It flips.
It completely flips. The dynamic shifts from maintaining the relationship to punishing the victim for trying to escape it.
So in October 2023, the punishment begins. But it doesn't look like Daniel. It looks like a ghost. Kristil receives a text message from a number she doesn't recognize, and the person on the other end claims to be Anthony Holland.
Right, and Anthony Holland was not an invention. He was a real person, a high school dropout that Kristil had dated very briefly over 2 decades prior, around the year 2000.
The messages start on October 2. The first one is relatively benign, asking to hook up. Kristil does what you were supposed to do. She ignores it. But the escalation within 24 hours of that silence is drastic.
It goes from 0 to 100 instantly.
The next messages tell her to kill herself and refer to their past relationship as a pity expletive.
The rapid escalation from a sexual solicitation to violent, degrading verbal abuse is a classic indicator of an offender seeking a reaction. When the initial lure, the attempt to draw her into a conversation fails, they resort to shock and aggression to force an engagement.
They just need any response.
Exactly. They need the victim to respond, to validate their control over the victim's emotional state.
I was thinking about this tactic, and it's like receiving a ransom note constructed from magazine clippings, but the clippings are pieces of your own personal history. Why would a stalker go to the trouble of impersonating a real person from the victim's past? Why not just invent a scary stranger? What is the strategic advantage there?
The strategic advantage is entirely psychological. If a random stranger threatens you, it is terrifying. But the threat is external. It is an anomaly. By using a verifiable ghost from her past, someone she actually dated, someone who existed in her reality, it adds immediate psychological weight.
It makes it real in a different way.
Yes, it makes the victim feel that an unresolved element of her own life has returned to punish her. Furthermore, it lends an air of credibility to the threat. The stalker can reference historical details, making the victim believe this person has been harboring a grudge for 20 years.
It also creates a massive diversion for law enforcement, right?
Oh, absolutely. It creates the perfect scapegoat. It diverts all investigative resources, all suspicion, and all of the victim's defensive energy outward, away from the true source of the danger within the home.
That's just sick. And the digital escalation doesn't stop at text messages. The stalker creates an email address, ahollandkicks@gmail.com. Kristil's family ends up nicknaming the stalker Kickman because of this.
Which is a chilling detail.
It is. And Kickman starts sending photographic evidence that he is watching her. He sends a photo of Kristil's car while she is sitting at a dentist appointment. He sends a taunting email noting that her car registration is expired. And then he sends a photo of Daniel arriving at his workplace.
The surveillance aspect is designed to induce a permanent state of hypervigilance. The stalker is demonstrating omniscience. By sending photos of mundane activities like a dentist appointment, the message is, you are never unobserved. I can see you everywhere.
And including Daniel in those photos.
Including Daniel in the surveillance photos is a calculated move to solidify the illusion that the threat is an external third party targeting the whole family.
The harassment then turns sexually degrading. Kickman places advertisements on a classified website called Locanto. The ads use Kristil's real phone number, her real town, and they solicit well-endowed men to run a train on her.
Yeah, this specific tactic falls under the umbrella of sextortion or digital degradation. The primary goal here isn't physical harm, is public shaming and isolation.
Just trying to ruin her life.
Exactly. By broadcasting her personal information with degrading sexual solicitations, the stalker makes a victim feel exposed and vulnerable within her own community. It is a systematic attempt to completely dismantle her sense of dignity, safety, and reputation.
Which brings us to how Kristil handles this absolute nightmare. Because her engineering background kicks in immediately, she doesn't fold. She applies that analytical mind to her own victimization and begins building a defense.
She approaches the stalking campaign as a systemic failure that requires an engineered solution. It's fascinating.
She compiles a massive, comprehensive dossier. Every single message logged by date, time, and content. She hires a private investigator to try and locate the real Anthony Holland and track these digital footprints. She alters her entire daily routine, varying her routes and times.
She was doing everything by the book.
Everything. On November 7, she walks into the Broomfield Police Department, sits down with Detective Andrew Martinez, and hands him this incredibly detailed timeline of the harassment.
Detective Martinez later remarked on how unusual her level of preparation was. She essentially constructed the foundation of the case for him.
Wow.
Yeah, despite admitting she was exhausted, constantly looking over her shoulder, and terrified the stalker was going to jump out of the bushes, she remained remarkably composed and methodical in her interaction with law enforcement.
And her family rallies around her with the same militaristic focus. Her father, Lars, initially gives her a .22 caliber handgun for protection, but they consult with a local police chief who is a family friend. He reviews the threat level and tells her the .22 simply isn't enough stopping power.
He was right.
He advises her to upgrade to a 9mm Sig Sauer equipped with a red dot sight for rapid target acquisition. She follows the advice, she buys the 9mm, she enrolls in shooting classes to become proficient. She obtains her concealed carry permit.
They are responding to the threat with appropriate severity. They are treating this like a hostile siege, reinforcing their physical security and preparing for a kinetic confrontation.
Her father even begins acting as an armed escort, driving her and her children to their various appointments.
Which just shows how seriously they took it.
But right in the middle of this defensive mobilization, we have to look at what Daniel is doing. And this is where the psychology gets profoundly dark. Let's talk about the hero paradox.
Daniel's behavior during this period is a masterclass in manipulation.
He goes to the police and files a report claiming he had a severe panic attack at the grocery store just because someone dropped a can behind him.
Blaming the victim.
Yeah, he repeatedly tells Kristil and her family that he feels completely inadequate, that he is failing in his duty to protect his wife. He even initiates intruder drills at the house.
This part is just...
He runs through scenarios with Kristil and the children, practicing exactly what they should do, where they should hide, and how they should react if Kickman breaks through the door.
It's unbelievable.
Wait, if Daniel is running home intruder drills with her, and he knows she has a 9mm and is taking shooting classes, isn't he taking a massive risk? What if he comes home late one night and she accidentally shoots him during a drill? The arrogance required to play that game seems astronomical.
The arrogance is the defining feature of the abuser in this scenario. He believes he is in absolute control of the narrative. In the realm of domestic abuse, this behavior aligns with the protector archetype, or the hero complex.
Right.
By manufacturing a threat against both of them, remember the surveillance photo at his workplace, he is actively attempting to foster a siege mentality within the marriage.
He's trying to force a trauma bond?
Exactly. He recognizes the marriage is ending. If he can create an environment where they are united against a terrifying, invisible common enemy, she won't leave him. She will lean on him for support.
That is so twisted.
But the ultimate psychological torture, the true depth of the depravity, is that the person orchestrating the terror is the exact same person training the victim to defend against it. He is watching her learn to shoot. He is running tactical drills with her.
Oh my God.
He knows her defensive blind spots because he is the one helping her identify them. He is literally studying the fortress from the inside while pretending to help build the walls.
So Kristil has done everything right. The police have the dossier. Detective Martinez takes the threat seriously. In mid-November, he files digital search warrants. He sends demands to Verizon, to TextNow, and to Google, seeking the IP addresses and subscriber information connected to the burner phones and the Gmail account used by Kickman. He throws the net out to catch the ghost.
And then it just sits there.
It just sits there. They slam into the fatal flaw in the systemic architecture. There is no statutory deadline for these telecommunications and tech companies to respond to search warrants in non-homicide cases. They are not legally required to hurry.
And we have to look at the scale of the data requests these companies handle, because it's staggering. Verizon, for instance, has publicly stated they receive upwards of 325,000 demands for information from law enforcement every single year.
That's almost 1,000 a day.
Right. Google processes hundreds of thousands globally. Yeah. When a warrant arrives, it enters a massive bureaucratic queue. Without a specific state or federal law forcing prioritization for severe threats like domestic violence or stalking, the companies inevitably slow-walk the responses.
Because it's just paperwork to them.
Exactly. A low-level compliance officer in a cubicle somewhere is sorting through thousands of PDFs. Unless the warrant explicitly states there's a dead body, it is treated as a low-priority administrative task.
So weeks pass. November turns into December. The warrants sit completely unfulfilled in those corporate queues. Detective Martinez has to tell Kristil that their hands are tied. They have to wait for the digital evidence to positively ID the devices before they can safely cross state lines and approach Anthony Holland in Utah.
Which just leaves her waiting.
Kristil actually tells a police officer during this waiting period that she feels like a sitting duck.
The administrative gap left her entirely exposed. She had the shield, she had the firearm, she had the police on her side, but she couldn't engage the enemy because the telecommunications companies were legally permitted to drag their feet.
It's infuriating.
The bureaucracy provided the cover the stalker needed to escalate.
We have to assume that by mid-December, Daniel realizes the clock is ticking. He knows the digital trail will eventually catch up with him once those companies comply. The divorce is still looming, the fake stalker ruse hasn't brought her running back into his arms, and the police are actively investigating. The walls are closing in.
He realizes his manufactured reality is on the verge of collapse. When an abuser realizes that coercive control is failing and that exposure is imminent, they frequently escalate to lethal violence.
The ultimate control.
Yes. The internal logic shifts rapidly from, if I can't control you, I will scare you, to, if I can't have you, nobody will.
Let's walk through the morning where the digital threat turns physical. December 14th, 2023. It's a Thursday. Kristil executes her normal morning routine. She drops 2 of her kids at school. She returns to her home on Promontory Loop right around 8 a.m. She pulls her car into the garage.
And the location of the ambush is highly significant here. Think back to her childhood, working on muscle cars.
Right.
The garage was a space Kristil inherently associated with safety, with technical mastery, with the protective presence of her father.
Daniel didn't go to work that morning. He is lying in wait inside that sanctuary. As she gets out of her vehicle, he attacks her from behind. He bludgeons her in the head with a blunt object. The medical examiner would later note this likely caused immediate unconsciousness. While she is incapacitated, he stabs her directly in the heart.
The strike from behind is indicative of a cowardly ambush. Even with his arrogance, he knew her capabilities. He knew she was armed and trained. He ensured she never had the opportunity to fight back.
Here is the detail that truly haunts this case. Kristel's 9mm Sig Sauer, the weapon she practiced with, the weapon she bought specifically to stop monster hunting her, is still holstered inside her purse nearby. She never even had a chance to reach for it. She was taken completely by surprise by the one person who was supposed to be her partner.
It perfectly illustrates the inherent flaw in the advice to just get a gun for protection in cases of intimate partner violence. A firearm is a tool for repelling an external threat.
Exactly.
If the threat already possesses the keys to the house, shares your bed, and knows all of your defensive protocols because they helped you practice them, a firearm's practically useless. The danger is already inside the perimeter.
Kristel is dead on the garage floor, but Daniel doesn't panic. He doesn't flee in a blind sweat. He initiates an incredibly calculated, methodical staging process. He begins to engage in temporal manipulation to construct a digital alibi.
He attempts to hack the timeline of the murder.
At 8:15 a.m., he uses Kristel's own phone to disable the home's security system. He then walks into their kitchen, retrieves a roll of blue masking tape from a drawer, and physically tapes over the lens of the doorbell camera.
He moves with precision. He knows the exact sight lines of the cameras, the location of the tape, the codes to the security system because it is his house.
The most sinister technological element of the entire staging happens next. Daniel takes Kristel's phone and utilizes the delayed send feature for text messaging.
This part is crucial.
He pre-programs a series of text messages to dispatch later that morning. He schedules messages to go to his own phone, to Kristel's brother, and to Detective Martinez. In these fabricated texts, he even weaves in fake claims that Kristel's having affairs, clearly trying to muddy the investigative waters and provide a motive for some imaginary, jealous outside killer.
This is a highly sophisticated forensic countermeasure. We need to understand how this technology works. When you schedule a text, you are instructing the phone to hold the data and transmit it to the cellular server at a future designated time.
It's like a digital time bomb.
Precisely. By scheduling texts from her phone to send long after he has left the property, he is creating artificial digital metadata that suggests she is still alive, awake, and actively communicating while he is physically somewhere else.
At 8:24 a.m., which is approximately 30 minutes later than his usual morning departure, he finally leaves the house. Neighborhood security cameras catch his car driving away. And on his way to work, he intentionally deactivates the dash cam inside his vehicle.
Another layer of countermeasures. He is ensuring there is no audio recording of his breathing, no video of him discarding evidence, and no record of his immediate post-murder commute.
At 8:56 a.m., while he is navigating traffic, his phone receives the text message he programmed on Kristel's phone an hour earlier. His fake alibi is officially established in the cellular network's logs. He arrives at his office building in Glendale at 9:27 a.m. He walks over to his favorite coffee shop and puts on a display of total normalcy.
The performance begins.
He orders a drink, complains to the barista that he received an iced drink instead of hot one, and patiently waits for a replacement.
During the trial, the defense would attempt to argue that a cold-blooded killer wouldn't stand around arguing about the temperature of a coffee.
Right. Like, who has time for that?
But the prosecution accurately countered that this behavior was exactly the point of the exercise. He was performing normalcy for an audience of baristas and co-workers. He was intentionally projecting the image of a man whose biggest problem that morning was a misunderstood coffee order.
Back at his desk, he begins calling and texting Kristel repeatedly, leaving voicemails, sending follow-up texts. No answer, obviously. Around noon, he escalates the performance. He calls the Broomfield police to request a welfare check, telling dispatch that it is completely out of character for his wife to be unreachable for this long.
Initiating the discovery of the body is a very common tactic for perpetrators. It allows them to insert themselves directly into the center of the investigation from the very first minute, framing themselves as the deeply concerned, cooperative partner.
Officer John O'Hare is dispatched and arrives at the Promontory Loop home at 12:28 p.m. The house is locked. He gets no answer at the front door. He notices the blue tape over the camera. He positions his patrol car near the garage, climbs onto the hood to elevate himself, peers through the high garage window, and spots Kristel's body on the floor.
And then Daniel arrives.
When Daniel arrives at the scene shortly after the police secure it, he delivers a masterclass performance of grief.
Victim advocates who were present noted that his physical display of emotional agony was intense.
He is wailing. He literally runs toward the yellow crime scene tape, shouting, "That's my house," before officers intercept him. He doubles over, appearing to retch on the pavement. He forcefully insists that he must be the one to break the news to his children.
It is a performance carefully calibrated for the police body cameras and the watching neighbors. But the flaw in relying on digital manipulation is that the perpetrator rarely controls the entire data stream.
Never.
A perfect digital alibi is only perfect until someone looks at the raw code behind it.
The Broomfield police are now standing over a dead mother in a garage, dealing with a hysterical husband, and holding 2 months' worth of police reports detailing a vicious stalker named Anthony Holland. What is their immediate move?
They deploy massive resources based on the stalker theory.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a prime suspect handed to them on a silver platter.
Detectives immediately mobilize and drive straight to Anthony Holland's residence in Eagle Mountain, Utah. It's about an hour south of Salt Lake City. They pound on his door. Holland works the night shift at a Texas roadhouse, so he answers the door groggy, confused, but entirely cooperative.
They ask him to confirm his identity and his relationship with Kristil. He acknowledges he is Anthony Holland and that Kristil was his first girlfriend back in high school. Then they ask the critical question.
Can you prove where you were this morning?
And he produces evidence that immediately ends the theory.
He has an absolutely bulletproof alibi. He provides his work records from the restaurant, and he hands them a receipt for a green sweatshirt he purchased at a local Kohl's department store in Utah. The timestamp on the receipt is exactly 12:01 p.m.
The forensic timeline established the murder occurred around 8:00 a.m. in Colorado. Eagle Mountain, Utah is an 8-hour drive from Broomfield. The laws of physics dictate that the man standing in front of them cannot possibly be the killer. The geographic distance clears him instantly.
Anthony Holland is cleared. But meanwhile, back in Colorado, a massive bureaucratic shift occurs. This is no longer a harassment case. This is no longer a stalking complaint. It is a homicide investigation. And because a life has been taken, those digital search warrants that Detective Martinez filed weeks ago, the ones sitting in a queue, are suddenly fast-tracked under the legal doctrine of exigent circumstances.
This contrast is perhaps the most tragic, infuriating aspect of the entire narrative. What took these massive tech corporations weeks to ignore as a mere domestic stalking complaint is now processed and returned in minutes. Verizon fulfilled the data request in 7 minutes. Google returned the IP logs in 6 minutes.
The data existed all along. The answers were sitting on a server the entire time Kristil was terrified in her home.
They were. The delay was not a technological limitation. It was purely an administrative roadblock. It was a procedural gap that ultimately cost a woman her life.
It's just devastating.
The telecommunications companies possessed the capability to instantaneously unmask the stalker. But the law did not compel them to prioritize the safety of a living woman over their standard processing queue until it escalated to a murder.
When that data finally comes back in minutes, the digital DNA tells a story that completely obliterates Daniel's carefully crafted narrative.
It dismantles the ghost persona line by line.
Let's look at the data. The logs reveal that the fake email accounts ahollingkicks@gmail.com were created and accessed using a password-protected IP network located at Daniel's specific workplace, the CDPHE. The burner phones utilized to send the threatening, escalating text messages. The purchase records show they were bought at a local Walgreens using a Visa gift card that was registered directly to Daniel Krug.
The paper trail is just glowing neon at this point.
Wait, if he's a meticulous, calculating guy, isn't using a password-protected IP at your own government workplace incredibly stupid?
It reveals the limits of his technical understanding. He believed that adopting a fake name and using a burner email was sufficient camouflage. He didn't understand that an IP address is a digital license plate. Furthermore, the telematics and location data provided by the carriers show that the physical location of the burner phone moved in simultaneous lockstep synchronization with Daniel's personal cell phone. Wherever Daniel went, the stalker went.
The digital footprint gets worse. They pull his recent internet search history. The day before he murdered his wife, Daniel searched, "When is a head injury a cause for concern?" He searched, "How hard to hit for head trauma to go unconscious?" And chillingly, "How long can you be unconscious without brain damage?"
He was actively researching the biomechanics of the exact methodology he intended to use. He wanted to know precisely how much force was required to incapacitate her without killing her immediately, allowing him time to deliver the fatal stab wound without resistance.
Armed with this incontrovertible digital evidence, Detectives Martinez and King Sullivan bring Daniel back into the station for questioning. He is sitting on the exact same blue couch where Kristil sat a month prior when she handed over her dossier. He is still playing the role of the grieving, devastated husband. And then Detective Martinez drops the hammer.
The pivotal moment.
He looks at Daniel and tells him they have spoken directly to Anthony Holland in Utah. His alibi is rock solid, and he is 100% cleared as a suspect.
This is the moment the psychological performance shatters.
The emotional agony just evaporates. Daniel becomes entirely stoic. He physically closes off, leaning back and crossing his arms defensively. He looks at the detectives and mutters, "It has to be the husband."
When a narcissist's carefully constructed narrative is directly challenged with irrefutable facts, the emotional facade drops instantly because it is no longer useful. He recognizes the external threat theory is dead.
Right. He needs a new angle.
So he attempts an immediate pivot, subtly suggesting that perhaps Kristil was having affairs and some other jealous lover killed her. He tries to point the finger at a generic husband figure to deflect from himself, but the detectives see the machinery working behind his eyes.
Daniel is arrested days later in a grocery store parking lot. And that brings us to the culmination of the criminal justice process, April 2025, the trial of Daniel Krug.
This trial serves as a fascinating case study, highlighting the evolution of forensic evidence presentation in the 21st century courtroom.
The prosecution is led by Kate Armstrong and Stephanie Fritz. Their narrative is cohesive and brutal. They argue that the core motive was absolute coercive control and homicidal gaslighting. Daniel wanted to stop the divorce at all costs. When his elaborate fake stalker ruse failed to frighten her into returning to his protection, he decided to silence her permanently.
The prosecution's narrative is highly effective because it provides the jury with the why. It explains the underlying mechanism of the stalking. It demonstrates that the harassment wasn't just random, chaotic cruelty. It was a highly calculated mechanism of control leading inexorably to murder.
The defense, led by attorney Philip Geigel, mounts a vigorous case based heavily on the concept of reasonable doubt. They focus their entire strategy on the physical evidence, or rather, the glaring lack of it. Geigel points out to the jury that there was absolutely no blood found inside Daniel's car. There was no blood on the clothes he wore to work that morning.
Which is technically true.
Right. The murder weapons themselves, the blunt object used for the head trauma and the knife used for the fatal stab wound, were never recovered. They highlight that forensic testing found unknown DNA on Kristil's neck and on the blue masking tape covering the camera, and they hammered the Broomfield Police Department for what they characterize as sloppy police work, noting heavily that investigators didn't even test Kristil's phone for fingerprints to prove who sent the delayed texts.
They threw everything at the wall.
I have to ask you how a jury processes this, because if you watch traditional crime dramas, the case hinges on the bloody knife or the fingerprint. How does a modern jury weigh a complete lack of physical blood evidence against a mountain of digital tracking data?
It represents a profound paradigm shift in modern forensics and jury psychology. Historically, juries demanded physical, biological DNA blood, hair fibers, fingerprints. The CSI effect taught them to expect it. But today, prosecutors rely heavily on digital DNA.
Like the metadata.
Yes. IP addresses, cell tower location pings, delayed text metadata, Wi-Fi connections, search histories. These data points create an incontrovertible, minute-by-minute timeline of a person's intent, location, and action.
So it outweighs the lack of a murder weapon.
Exactly. When you analyze the defense's argument, the lack of physical evidence actually supported the prosecution's case when viewed through the lens of the digital timeline. The digital evidence definitively proved Daniel staged the scene. It proved he manipulated the security cameras and the phone.
Which means he planned ahead.
Right. Therefore, it is highly logical for a jury to infer that a man meticulous enough to hack a timeline would take similar physical precautions. He likely wore protective clothing or gloves. He used the 30 unaccounted for minutes before he arrived at work to dispose of the weapons and the bloody clothes. The digital footprint proves the premeditation. The lack of physical evidence simply proves the successful execution of that premeditated cover-up.
The jury absolutely bought the digital DNA argument. It takes them just one single day of deliberation to convict Daniel Krug on all counts: first-degree murder, 2 counts of stalking, and criminal impersonation.
For a multi-week trial with complex technical evidence, 1 day of deliberation is a remarkably swift, decisive verdict.
Judge Priscilla Lowe sentences him to the mandatory penalty of life without parole. But she doesn't stop with the minimum. She adds 9.5 consecutive years specifically for the stalking and impersonation convictions. During the sentencing, she labels his actions as pure selfish evil and an example of depravity. The district attorney, Brian Mason, publicly states that Daniel played the role of a puppet master, and the psychological terror he inflicted on his own family was unimaginable.
The judicial system functioned properly at the very end. It provided closure and accountability for the crime. However, putting Daniel Krug in a prison cell for the rest of his life did absolutely nothing to fix the underlying structural system that failed Kristil in the first place.
And this is where the narrative shifts from the closure of a courtroom to the opening battles of a state house. Because Kristil's family, processing their grief, came to a terrifying realization. The system didn't break down, the police didn't lose the paperwork, the tech companies didn't commit a crime. The system functioned exactly as it was legally designed to function, and that design was the core problem.
To understand why this requires legislative intervention, we have to look at the statistical reality of stalking and domestic violence. Because Kristil's case is not an isolated anomaly.
The macro-level data on this is horrifying. Studies show that stalking increases the risk of intimate partner homicide threefold. If you are being stalked, you are 3 times more likely to be murdered. Furthermore, 54% of victims of completed domestic homicides reported experiencing stalking prior to the lethal attack. And in our modern era, an astonishing 80% of stalking victims report being stalked via technology, text messages, GPS trackers, social media impersonation.
Those statistics demonstrate clearly that digital stalking is not a minor nuisance crime. It is a highly reliable precursor to lethal violence. It is the red flashing warning light on the dashboard before a murder occurs. Yet the law was treating it like a low-priority paperwork issue.
Enter Becky Ivanoff. Becky is Kristil's cousin. But more importantly for this phase of the story, she is a former deputy district attorney out of Lane County, Oregon, who spent her career specializing specifically in domestic violence cases.
She possesses the exact intersection of personal motivation and deep legal expertise required to translate a family tragedy into actionable, watertight policy.
Becky looks at the timeline of what happened. She sees the weeks of agonizing waiting for Verizon and Google to reply to the warrants while Kristil lived in absolute terror. She understands the legal mechanics of why those delays happen, and she realizes the law itself has to change. She begins drafting what will become known as Kristil's Law.
She intimately understands that law enforcement on the ground is completely hamstrung by corporate timelines. A detective can't force a tech giant to move faster simply by asking nicely. The only way to alter corporate behavior is through strict statutory mandates with legal consequences for non-compliance.
So Kristil's Law, officially introduced as House Bill 4045, is brought to the Oregon legislature during the 2026 short session. It is co-sponsored by Republican Representative Kevin Mannix and Democratic Senator Floyd Przansky.
Securing bipartisan support right out of the gate is key to survival in a short legislative session. They framed it correctly. It transcends political divisions because homicide prevention is a universal priority that every lawmaker can support.
The mandate of the drafted bill is incredibly clear and aggressive. It forces a statutory deadline on the tech industry. Under Kristil's Law, social media companies must respond to search warrants in domestic violence and stalking cases within 72 hours. All other telecommunications companies, like internet service providers and cell phone carriers, must respond within 5 business days. No more weeks of waiting in a digital queue.
The legal strategy Becky Ivanoff employed here is brilliant in its restraint. Broad data mandates laws asking tech companies to turn over data faster across the board often face intense, well-funded pushback from the tech lobby. They cite user privacy concerns, First Amendment issues, and the sheer administrative burden of compliance.
Right, they fight it tooth and nail.
By keeping the scope of Kristil's Law strictly limited to severe, life-threatening scenarios, specifically stalking and domestic violence warrants, Becky navigated perfectly around those corporate hurdles. It is exceptionally difficult from a public relations standpoint for a tech company to publicly lobby against a bill designed solely to force them to turn over data to stop a stalker. As a result of this tight legal framing, the bill achieves unanimous passage in both the Oregon House and Senate.
Unanimous passage is incredibly rare, but Oregon is just the starting line. Kristil's family has already formed a steering committee in Colorado. They are holding continuous meetings with victim advocates, law enforcement officials, and state legislators. Their ultimate goal is pushing for Kristil's Law to be adopted across all 50 states. They refuse to view this as just a privacy or technology issue. They view it fundamentally as nationwide homicide prevention.
Their premise is undeniably correct. If the Broomfield law enforcement had received Daniel Krug's IP address within 72 hours of filing that first warrant in mid-November, the entire trajectory changes. Kristil would have known instantly that the threat was her own husband. She could have enacted a safety plan that excluded him, removed herself and her children from the house, and fundamentally changed her defensive posture. She would almost certainly still be alive today.
As we wrap up this deep dive, let's distill the legacy of Kristil Krug.
Her legacy is a stark, devastating reminder of the realities of modern abuse. In the digital era, the most dangerous stalker is often not a mysterious stranger hiding in the bushes outside your window. The most dangerous stalker is the person holding the key to the front door, the person utilizing modern technology to project fear and manipulate reality from within the supposed sanctuary of your own home.
Which leads me to a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. We spend so much money, time, and effort making our homes smarter and our lives more digitized. We buy the cameras, we sync the phones, assuming that this web of technology acts as an impenetrable protective shield. But if our legal system doesn't force the tech giants who build these tools to act at the literal speed of human danger, are we simply building digital cages for our own abusers to lock us inside?
It is a profound and necessary question as our lives become increasingly entangled with our devices.
I want to hear your thoughts on this complex intersection of technology and the law. Do you think a 72-hour deadline for social media companies is fast enough when human lives are actively on the line? Or should tech companies be legally forced to treat all domestic violence and stalking warrants as immediate, zero-hour emergencies, dropping everything else to comply? If you are watching us on YouTube, please engage with that specific question down in the comments. We read them all. And be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a deep dive. For our audio listeners, please subscribe on your favorite audio platform to ensure you catch every single deep dive we release. Remember, the monster might be closer than you think. Stay safe and keep asking questions.